Welcome to the Centered Podcast. I'm Sean Tilley, editor of We Distribute, and I'm here with Matthias Pfefferle, who is the developer of the WordPress-ActivityPub plugin. This is a core plugin and integration that we actually use on our own website for getting news out to the Fediverse. Thank you for joining us, Matthias.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You've been in the WordPress community for some time. I know you've done a suite of plugins with ActivityPub and IndieWeb and a couple of foundational technologies that OStatus used. How did you get to the position where you are today with developing the ActivityPub plugin for WordPress?
Okay, that could be a long story.
That's okay. We have time.
I fell in love with the internet in the late 1990s. And I realized really early that I couldn't get that much done with only HTML. So I searched for a CMS system and stumbled upon the predecessor of WordPress B2. And and I think I stayed with it for quite some time. And I also fell in love with the whole blogging. And I think you could say that this was kind of the first decentralized networking thing or social networking thing, the blogosphere, commenting pingbacks. And I liked that a lot and blogged a lot and wrote a lot, very personal stuff, not that much techie stuff. And was very frustrated when the social networks took over. I think in the early days it was still playing nicely with blogs, having some widgets for the blogs for blog rolling or Flickr or how's the name of the link thing? Delicious.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But then it got really closed with Facebook, and it was really hard to get conversations out and in. So I invested a lot to keep blogging relevant, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
kind of to have best of both worlds, to still be able to publish stuff on your blog, but also have all the positives from a social network. And I think that was the reason I found out about the IndieWeb. That was kind of one of the first. Before IndieWeb, it was, I think, the first Fediverse protocol that was kind of called Fediverse, I think, with OStatus. And that was also, I think, one of the first protocols I tried to bring into WordPress.
Yeah.
And it really worked well. And I was really, really happy when Mastodon starts back in the days with OStatus.
Yep.
And reactivated the plugin, and it really worked. And that was really amazing. And I was kind of frustrated when they moved over to ActivityPub and abandoned OStatus completely. Yeah, but that forced me into ActivityPub, and that's my main job today. Yeah.
That's amazing. And you actually work for Automatic directly nowadays, right?
Yeah.
What has that experience been like? Because I know that for a long time, your ActivityPub plugin, I think, was just an independent effort, but nowadays it's actually sponsored by Automatic itself.
Yeah. So now I can work full time on my spare time project. That's really amazing.
Yeah,
But
that's
I
the
need
dream.
a new spare time project, so
Yeah.
any suggestions welcome.
So I'm curious though. At what point did you decide you looked at WordPress? You did a lot of blogging. When did you decide to actually start developing plugins for it?
It was mainly because of the eat your own dog food thing.
Yeah.
I used B2 and WordPress for my own blog, so I decided, okay, it might be a good idea to start with WordPress. So it was not a decision. What's the best blogging platform? Where should I build on top of? It was simply that was the thing I used. So I never thought about anything else. So yeah, it started there, and then I made really good progress. So it was easy to understand how WordPress works, how plugins work. So yeah, it was kind of nice. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about Mastodon migrating from O status to ActivityPub. For our audience that are newer to Mastodon, a long time ago in the ancient years of 2016, uh, Mastodon was an O status based platform. It was originally designed to be compatible with GNU Social, which it was kind of filling that space of. It was just, some nerd had this idea that, hey, what if I made a better GNU Social and just used this technology that was already there and built it the way I wanted to build it? So there was this interesting kind of movement, this convergence point from Mastodon supporting O status to Mastodon supporting both O status and ActivityPub to them killing off O status support. Were there challenges along the way when your plugin was working 1 minute and then they started to move over and suddenly it wasn't?
I think it worked for over a year, so it wasn't. There was time to decide to move
Oh,
over to ActivityPub,
thank
so it was
goodness.
not from one day to another. But it was frustrating nevertheless, because it's up to that day it all were spare time projects, and it's always a huge invest to work on different protocols and
Yeah.
try to bring them into WordPress. And it's always frustrating when someone decides, okay, that's I have a better idea, I use a different protocol. I think the only thing that um, kept me optimistic was that it was not yet another self-invented thing,
Mm.
but it was the W3C standard. So yeah, that kept me optimistic, at least. Yeah.
A lot harder. I think that's a lot of criticism some people have of Blue Sky is that
Yeah.
right now Blue Sky is an independent effort. And, from a skeptic's point of view, from a distance, you look at this new thing, you're like, maybe I should support that. Who else is supporting it? And then you're like, well, they just kind of made it themselves, I guess.
Yeah, and I really understand the point to build your own thing,
Yeah.
because it better fits with the platform you build, and it supports every use case you need. But from the independent developer perspective, it's really frustrating, because I cannot support any open protocol by my own besides of my full work,
Yeah.
my day job. This is now a bit different,
Yeah.
but not everyone has that opportunity. And yeah, so it's this not invented here syndrome could be really frustrating. Yeah.
I've certainly seen it more than a few times myself. Sometimes a new project comes out of nowhere, and it seems like every single piece is just completely different technology
Yeah.
that doesn't even work in a similar way, and you're just left like, but we already had something. Why
Yeah.
did you do this? I
Yeah.
understand it though, and I think to some degree it's a healthy motivation.
Yeah. And what the hardest thing when reading the first drafts of the Blue Sky the AT protocol draft, the FAQ thing, there was a sentence like, we looked at ActivityPub, but they had no account migration, so we decided to build something on our own. And I thought, okay, it's one thing missing, and you reinvent everything instead of simply trying to bring the account mover thing into the protocol, and that was really
Well, that's kind of how that happens, though. Is a bunch of people get together. They're like, we want to use this thing, but we want one thing to be different. What do we need to make that work? And then suddenly, like, they've moved 20 things over to make that one thing work, and it's not the same protocol anymore. So it's
yeah,
pretty funny
sadly.
to witness, but I think that's healthy to some degree to have a little competition, to have people trying different things, and to have new ideas.
Totally, yeah.
So I was curious, just kind of from your perspective on working on this integration, what has been the hardest part about adopting ActivityPub? Would you be comfortable sharing some of your challenges and struggles?
Yeah, sure. The hardest part, and to compare that with OStatus, it was really easy to implement
Yep.
the full stack because you haven't had to care about the whole distribution stuff, because that was done by the PubSub Hubbub servers back in the days.
Yes.
So now it's called WebSub, and
yeah.
So you only had to store the followers and had to make sure that you publish the new posts to the PubSub Hubbub servers, but all of your followers subscribe to your feeds on the PubSub Hubbub server hubs.
Yep.
So they were responsible for all the distribution.
Yeah.
And the main difference between OStatus and ActivityPub is that now
you have an inbox and an outbox.
Yeah. And that's it's very easy when it comes to WordPress.com, because this is a huge server infrastructure. So you do not have to care that much about sending out a lot of stuff and queuing a lot of stuff. But for shared hosting environments, it's really hard to do that on your own. That means if you have a high frequented blog, maybe with you are a good example for that, having some 1,000 followers. It's a thing to send 1,000 notifications out to the different inboxes, and vice versa to receive the whole traffic from the Fediverse. And it's not only the traffic that's meant for your server, it's a lot of delete things.
Yeah.
And it's
This is like
really
definitely
high traffic for a little WordPress instance that runs on a low budget shared hosting server. And I have a lot of issues where people wrote that their server are really down for 5 to 10 minutes because they could not handle the traffic after they publish new posts. So it's really a thing.
Yeah, that's definitely a shortcoming, and it's like, I'm sure there are ways to work around that. Maybe you could batch queuing up and like maybe delay deliveries within a batch.
Yeah, but this is also the problem with shared hosting. Not every shared hosting environment has cron jobs and could make a use of the WP CLI thing.
Yeah.
So this is really. I just recently had an issue where someone found out that hundreds of cron jobs were queued up because he has not set up a cron job to work through his schedule. So it's in theory you could do that, yes, but in shared hosting everything is possible. So Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely kind of being thrown back through nostalgia to my early days of using WordPress. I was definitely on shared hosting, like one of the free shared hosts that would like give you like 10 megabytes of space and that was it. Um, you can't really modify very much under the hood. Like you get like maybe cPanel and like a little FTP server to upload things, but like if you want to modify things, if you want to add things like cron jobs, the closest thing you're going to get is like fake cron, or
Yeah.
you have some kind of external server do that for you.
Yeah, through
Uh,
HTTP or
which
something.
it
Yeah.
just gets really ugly. So I
Yeah.
can imagine that's definitely a bottleneck and can cause a lot of issue tickets that maybe you didn't need to read because you're like, oh, he's on shared hosting.
Yeah, but that's WordPress. So
Yeah.
it's I I would love to support everything, and it's I had a really hard time to fight against shared hosting, I think. So there another thing that's really hard with shared hosting is the well-known URIs for WebFinger. So well-known is also used in setups for Let's Encrypt. So there are shared hosting environments that block the well-known path completely, so that it doesn't matter if you try to override the Let's Encrypt endpoint or want to introduce something different. It's simply not possible,
Oh
and
no.
it's also not possible to discuss that with them. There were some that made some extra setups for every user that complains through their support, but it was it really was hard. And I mentioned in the beginning that it was really easy to implement plugins into for WordPress, and it's PHP, and so there are some really ugly plugins around, and there you have to also you do not have to only fight against the hosting environment. You also have to fight against different setups and different plugins. So when it comes to caching, it's also really painful, because ActivityPub is heavily using the content negotiation. That means one endpoint for the HTML representation and the JSON representation, and you differentiate using different accept headers. And a lot of caching plugins um, do not cache the versions depending on the accept header, and have no possibilities to add that feature, at least with using some hooks or special settings.
Yeah.
So I had to recommend a lot of users to change their caching plugins, which is also not that easy
Yeah.
for an end user to change the whole setup that worked before installing ActivityPub. So yeah.
Yeah, we've definitely had some headaches in the past, and what's kind of
Yeah,
funny
it
is
was
that
also for we do. Yeah.
it's funny because like ours was actually caused by the Jetpack plugin.
Oh,
So, so it's like, oh, uh, hmm,
I will
and
take that with me.
it's again, this is not a criticism. It's just more like trying to build for all these different technologies. Like you'd think it would be easy, but just as you pointed out, there's all these like dependencies or secondhand effects you have to account for. Clashing with other plugins, I think, is a great example too with caching. WordPress is one of those weird architectures where it seems like on the surface it would be easy, and then you get like the weirdest
Yeah.
tickets about like, hey, my site's generating an error, there's a white screen and I can't see anything. And like if you're anybody that works with WordPress, usually the first pieces of advice you'll find anywhere when you have a problem is try uninstalling your plugins first.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's really, I think that when I try to think about, okay, what could possibly go wrong, and try to find ways to detect that. There's always hundreds of cases that I never thought about at all.
That's
So
just
it's
development
really
for you.
it's a really creative environment. Yeah.
How is the state of the plugin looking today?
Oh, it changed a lot. It's helped to work full time on the plugin. It was a bit tricky, and I had to rework some things to play nicely with WordPress.com, because that setup is a bit different to a classic shared hosting or single installation. But besides of that, it grew a lot, and I have a colleague that now works full time on the plugin too, and he's very good with all the UI stuff. I'm not into JavaScript at all, and React, and you name it. So he did a really good job implementing, starting with the follow button and the followers list. And he's now working on a nice UI for the profile, so that you could, kind of the same way as with Mastodon, that you could use a profile picture, a nice description, some recommended links or free text. And we hope that it would be inline editing, so that you could add this block to your page and then edit it directly in the view. So this will be kind of nice. And then there started a lot of projects around the ActivityPub plugin in the event community. So what's the event platform called?
Mobilizon.
Yeah, exactly. And they try to enhance WordPress to work nicely with the Mobilizon platform. We had a lot of discussions lately. We try to work together to have the ActivityPub plugin as a nice foundation, so that they can build their specialties on top of the ActivityPub plugin. And they try to bridge the big event plugins for WordPress through the ActivityPub plugin to be compatible with Mobilizon.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And that's also a nice thing, that besides of all the bad plugins we discussed already,
I know.
it's a nice thing to have such an ecosystem with such a lot of different plugins in special for special cases like podcasting, events, e-commerce, and stuff. And we really try to have the ActivityPub plugin as extensible as possible, so that other third-party plugin developers could hook into the ActivityPub plugin to make their content Fediverse compatible. So if you, for example, build a podcasting plugin, so that you will be able to share all the podcasts through the ActivityPub plugin without developing too much.
Yep. Yeah, that's definitely something that we're interested in experimenting with internally. I know that we reached out in an issue on your Git repo about it. We're interested in the possibility of having, like, say, podcast episodes show up as notes, and short form content show up in a Mastodon native kind of way. And I think, like, that's a pretty exciting direction to go in, because that at least, like, gives people a lot more customization in terms of what they want with their WordPress. Now, obviously, like, there might be, like, more issues that come in because of that. Someone might be like, I uploaded a video, but it doesn't look right on PeerTube or something like that.
And that's that's really interesting and very special to WordPress. It seems that the common WordPress user wants to customize everything. It's if you think about, if you go to Mastodon, you mainly keep it as it is, and you write stuff there, and you do not care much about how it looks like on different platforms. But on WordPress, it's always okay. I have that very special custom post type thing, and I
Right.
want to have that look different to the normal post. How can I set that up correctly? It's
Yeah. I've done my fair share of like custom theme development, and I've experimented with like uh things like pods, which expand the functionality of WordPress quite a lot by letting you build custom post types with all these fields and stuff. And it's really fun to make it render out in the template, but there's like all kinds of weird data stuff going on. It's not like a normal WordPress post. It's not represented in the database the way it looks on the page. So there's like a lot of like hard things that can come out of that. If I want to write my own uh, custom review system that looks like something on IGN with different sections for like, oh, here are the good things, here are the bad things, here's the score. Um, that's like a whole lot of other things that a plugin like ActivityPub would have to think about. And obviously, you want to keep it simple rather than make it more complicated.
I try, yeah, and I think it's way more complicated than I wanted it to be, and I have some plans to to simplify the settings a bit again, to strip out a lot of the special customization things, to have a better best guess thing, to better support different post types, and to try to assume the best possible representation also for custom post types. Like, for example, if someone has a custom post type that has no title, it is most commonly a note.
A note, yep.
Yeah, and stuff like that. And I hope it will work out.
I think it will. I think it's just that it's still kind of a new thing. And, I think you're in a unique position. Like you said, you have the opportunity to work on it full time. What has that been like? What was it like when Automatic approached you and they're like, hey, we want to sponsor this and this is going to be your job?
I think it was in November 2022 when Matt Mullenweg wrote on Twitter that he wants to have ActivityPub for Tumblr. And I thought, okay, let's write him. Let's answer why not WordPress. And I haven't thought a lot about that. So simply answered, and then I think some days or weeks later, they contacted me, and it was kind of, yeah, what about WordPress? We had a look, and there's not much around there. So do you want to do that for us? And yeah, I couldn't say no.
No, that's really cool, though. That's a very rare opportunity amongst
Yeah, really,
Fediverse
really.
devs. I think aside from maybe Eugen and a few other people, maybe Danza, it's very difficult to like secure funding and kind of maintain a full-time job doing it. And I have to applaud anybody that's able to do that. That's super cool.
And I think Dansat is not fully working on that. I think he has still a full-time job.
I think he has like a side thing. Yeah.
It's interesting. What do you call the side thing?
His main job, whatever that is. I don't know about his personal life. I don't know what he does, but the output that man gives, you could fall into the
amazing.
impression that guy's doing it full time.
That's really amazing. Yeah.
So, now that you're under the Automatic umbrella, so to speak, what does your day to day look like? What does working on the plugin look like? Are there like long term plans within Automatic to more integrate ActivityPub?
We had some long-term ideas that are mostly implemented now. So for the moment, we are currently looking what's the next big and best thing to do. What I think it's really interesting to work on, but it's not directly ActivityPub, is Alex Kirk, a colleague of mine, worked on a Mastodon API plugin.
Yes.
In his spare time. And I really like the idea because a lot of WordPress desktop applications or mobile applications are really, really complicated because they are built with long content in mind, always. Having the simply write something and simply post something and maybe add an image is so it's so easy with a Mastodon app. So I think this, and also in combination with the ActivityPub plugin, it really feels like you are on a social network, but you still only use your WordPress blog, and that feels really amazing. And we try to make the Mastodon API plugin a bit more mature on a hackathon in March, I think. And we try to implement internal and external APIs. So we want to support the full API set, of Mastodon as the outside API thing, and to at least implement the full flavored API as an internal API, so that other plugins could use hooks or filters or actions to react to API calls. So we do not support every use case that Mastodon supports with the ActivityPub plugin, or WordPress itself does not support everything. But there are as I said, there are a lot of plugins out there that maybe can handle likes or can handle boosts or something like that better than the ActivityPub plugin could ever do. So it would be nice to have the possibility for them to simply react on that and to bring their content into all of that. That would really be a nice thing. And we are still thinking about how to implement the following part, because for now it's the main focus was always only to on the publisher side. Others can follow your blog and you publish stuff, and then we also implemented the commenting reply possibilities, so that others can reply on the Fediverse, and it will be federated back to the comment section. And the latest iteration was to, if you comment on a federated comment on your blog, it will be federated back to Mastodon and stuff. But it wasn't possible to follow others. There's also a plugin from Alex Kirk. It's called Friends, but he had a bit of a different approach. The Friends plugin supports following in general. The plugin supports a lot of different ways to follow others. There's RSS and some other proprietary APIs. And he also added support on top of the ActivityPub plugin to follow. But we want to have that, or we think about to have that more directly in the ActivityPub plugin, so that you do not have to install as much plugins. But at least we want to have a foundational thing, so that it's from the it's supported in the plugin, but maybe we do not start with a UI in the first place. Kind of the same way as with the Mastodon apps thing, so that we provide some internal hooks that others could implement their following thing on top of the ActivityPub plugin. And then as a last step, maybe to have a simple UI that at least lets you kind of see a stream of your followers inside of your WordPress installation.
So this is a little bit of a leading question. I certainly do not intend to put you on the spot, but I do have kind of just a general curiosity. Do you think somewhere down the road it might be possible that your ActivityPub plugin could become part of WordPress core?
It's always hard for me to see so much code that I wrote being part of WordPress core. But besides of that, I'm not sure. It's okay. There are different things, I think. One thing is I would love to see it as a core feature, but before it could be a core feature, there has to be a lot of change inside of WordPress.
Yep.
Because WordPress is still a very classic blogging platform.
Yes.
So there is still a differentiation between blog posts and comments, for example. And that's really hard if you want to have a unified outbox, for example. It's not that you can make a simple query to the posts table, because you do not get the comments, for example. So to work around that, you have to implement kind of your own layer where you have a lot of redundancies to store the same information on too many different places to have a unified ActivityPub experience. So I think, and that's why I would love to have that as a real core feature, because it would force the ActivityPub community to change something, to maybe rewrite the comments feature to also use posts for comments and have kind of a hierarchy. Kind of this post is a reply to that post thing, like it's done with Mastodon, Twitter, and every modern microblogging service. And that would make it way easier to implement or to work with ActivityPub. So the biggest issues with the ActivityPub plugin so far were how can we store the data as effective as possible, and how can we still reuse as much as possible from the core WordPress database structure or code base. So that's why I would love to see it in there. But because these would be really, really groundbreaking, and it would be really big changes. So I'm not sure if this would be a thing, at least short term. And
totally fair, and I understand. Yeah. And I was not saying, please do this today. It was more of just, I think that there's a lot of potential in the blogging and publishing side of the Fediverse that has not really been tapped into fully yet. I think like we're starting to see things like Flipboard and Newsmast and a couple other like curation and publishing platforms. Medium has an example where they run their own Mastodon instance now. Like, I don't think we're quite at the point where like rich content and publishing are really happening in the Fediverse yet, but I think it's coming. And I think WordPress being able to at least support ActivityPub in the way that it has already has been amazing. But obviously, like, there's still a lot to be done. I think it's kind of frustrating that when you publish an article out to Mastodon, sometimes Mastodon will make it look really weird if you have attachments. Um, I would love to see like sort of a universal support of an article type, even if it's just a simple like link with a picture. I just think that there's a lot of potential for some really new experiences with publishing and reading and writing and replying that we're only just starting to see today.
Yeah, exactly. And there are still discussions about what might be possible changes for WordPress. At least I try to force the discussions. And I think it does not have to be directly part of the core, but if it's possible to change the WordPress core system to better support modern communication protocols, it would help a lot, and it would make the development of these protocols or plugins way easier.
As far as your future vision of what the Fediverse could look like, what are things that you would like to see in the Fediverse in the future? Like specific to what you're working on, is there anything that would make your experience of publishing to it, reading from it, interacting with it, fit in line with what you envision it? Like, what is your vision for what's coming?
You already mentioned that with the rich text content. I think, and that's mainly because of Mastodon, I think, because there are a lot of platforms out there like Friendica Friendica supports a lot of different activity objects fairly well. But Mastodon kind of taught us that it should be a note and it should look like that. And that was, besides of that, it was frustrating in the beginning because I thought, okay, I will map the WordPress post formats onto the activity post formats, and realized very early that this would not work.
Yeah.
Because articles, a lot
They're
of
like really
platforms,
tall and really
yeah,
skinny.
yeah, and they were really tall and skinny only when I used the node activity. When I
Yep.
use article, it is stripped down to a link.
Yep.
And in the early days of Mastodon, I think they used the summary to as the content warning thing.
Yep.
I think so. I learned a lot in the early days, and it was really frustrating. And it began to change a bit. Mastodon invested a bit um, to style the article a bit better, and I would love to see the support of the different activity objects way more than it's at the moment. And I also had a discussion with Dan Sub from PixelFed, because he also only supports Node so far. And I just mentioned that I wanted to work on a better default representation of the different post formats.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to use the correct object type for that.
Yep.
Hopefully. But we could only release that. It's a hen egg thing.
Yep.
When at least PixelFed and Mastodon have the at least basic support for that.
Yep.
But I would think it would be way easier for PixelFed, for example, to only read the media post types, and for Mastodon to work with long form content, because it's easier to see if this is a long form content if you simply look for the article object type and then maybe show the summary and have a read more link below that, something like that. I would love to see that. And we talked about that before starting the podcast. I would love to see better support for single user installations, maybe on shared hosting, to not only focus on content negotiation, but maybe have some link headers to map to your JSON representation of a profile and something similar, and maybe not to require web mention. If someone uses it, fine, but maybe to not require it.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's, as I mentioned, it's hard to do that all on shared hosting.
It really
with
is.
PHP. So yeah, I think that would be the two things I would love to see.
No, I think that's wonderful, and honestly, I think slowly but surely we will get there. It's just one of those things where certain aspects have to gradually change over time. I'm honestly surprised that shared hosting is still a thing.
Yeah, but
it works.
It's for
cheap.
good and for bad. I think it's on the one hand, yeah, there are a lot of other possibilities, but on the other hand, it's nice to have a really cheap hosting version so that people could be could own their data and could install their blogs even without lots of money. So
do you think enabling the social integration might change like the aspect of what blogs are? So like a good example, we talked to Manton Reese a couple of weeks back, and he was kind of really focused on microblog and how like the blog should be kind of the center of his users' world. In terms of like that is like the source that their online life kind of comes from. And I always wondered, like, ActivityPub sort of enables a whole social dynamic to something that's much more traditional as far as publishing is concerned. Like, do you think that maybe blogs in the future might be a little bit more, for lack of a better word, social networky?
I'm not sure if it would be more social networky, but what I experienced so far is that you get a lot more interaction on your blog posts when federating them.
Yes.
So I think, and that's also what the indie web realized way earlier, that the whole blogging community messed up the user experience completely. Because it's, if you want to subscribe to a blog, you have to know about RSS. You have to know what an RSS reader is. You have to know how to do that. And to comment to a new blog post, you have to click on the blog post, go to their website, fill out the comment form, and comment. And in the best case, you could subscribe to the comment section to see if someone else is commenting to your comment. And then you get an email, a third app, and if you want to reply to that email, you have to go back to the website again. And this is
not a
no
good
one does
experience.
that really.
No.
So I think that's one of the main cases. No one really comments on blogs anymore. And with Mastodon and with ActivityPub and with using the ActivityPub, the Mastodon app, or any other Fediverse app, it's so much easier to reply to something you read in your stream. You do not have to change UIs. You do not have to change apps. It's simply clicking a button, fill out or type your comment and send it. That's it.
Yeah.
So you get a lot more reactions to your blog posts, and that's really amazing, because in the end, nothing changed. I still write my blog posts as I did before. I have not changed really anything in my workload or my working experience. But I get a lot of more interactions and a lot of more reactions to my blog posts, and I think that's the main thing to yeah. It's I think a lot of the early bloggers moved to the social networks because of that. You have an audience that reads your posts, you see how big your audience is, and you get reactions to your text and your images. And that was not the case for the blogosphere. And that would come back if you use the ActivityPub plugin. And that's why I do all of that, because now you really have a real fully decentralized communication thing on top of WordPress or on top of the blogosphere.
It really does tie everything you just discussed as all those separate steps. It really ties all of those things together. And I think that's a much better user experience than having to go through 15 steps to see if someone responded to your comment. Well, Matthias, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on. We know I could talk about this all day, but
me too.
I wanted to just highlight if you had any parting thoughts or advice to young developers that want to get into the Fediverse, or just maybe people that are working on WordPress, just anything that comes to mind that you'd like to share with the audience.
What helped me a lot is to simply do stuff and release it as fast as possible and as early as possible, and simply try out things. So it took some time, but after 20 years hacking around with WordPress plugins, I finally could make a living out of that. So it's amazing what you could do with some lines of code. And I talked with friends, the highest barrier is to publish also your early ideas. So open source is amazing.
And we are very happy to benefit from your work. Thank you for joining me, Matthias. Thank you for listening to this episode of Dissenter by We Distribute. You can follow our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, Podcast Index, and our site at WeDistribute.org. For our articles, you can subscribe to us directly at news@WeDistribute.org on the Fediverse, or follow our microblog at hello@social.WeDistribute.org. Our efforts depend on the contribution of listeners and supporters like you. Check out our Open Collective at opencollective.com/WeDistribute. Thank you, and you've been the best.